Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode I'm going to show you how to refurbish one of these computers so that you can do some PC emulation. So whether that's going into your new custom virtual pinball cabinet or even an upgrade to your Raspberry Pi arcade cabinet. So if you don't know much about computers, you're going to want to stick around. Now the beautiful thing about emulating games on a PC is that often we're trying to emulate games that are 20, 30 years old. And so even a 10, 15-year-old gaming rig is going to be miles ahead of what you need. In fact, if you are still running a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus or something like that on your arcade cabinet, and you're thinking about, upgrading to a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gigs of RAM, don't do it. You're going to spend $100, $150, and really you can put all that towards refurbishing one of these guys and be miles ahead of a Raspberry Pi. Right, where can I get one of these PCs for cheap, if not free? Well, chances are you've already got one sitting in your office collecting dust for the last 4 or 5 years. If that's the case, dust it off, open it up, and let's see what we're working with. Now, if you don't have something at your house, talk to your friends, family, coworkers. There's guaranteed there's going to be people that have PCs sitting around their house that are ready to go to recycling. And if you can, try to get multiples, 2 or 3 of these things. That way you can sometimes cobble the parts together and come up with one really good rig. Now, if you are strapped for time and you can't wait months and months to get these kind of parts flowing in, you can pay to get something new, but I would not recommend spending more than about $150 because you don't need a really super powerful computer to do what we're going to do. Now, what kind of computer should you be looking for a minimum spec? Well, it really boils down to what is the resolution that you want to display in. If you're wanting 4K, then be ready to pay through the nose for a computer and a video card to be able to do that. And that's why I'm not doing that for this build. I'm going to focus on a computer for a 1080p build. So what are my recommendations for a minimum? I would go for a quad-core computer or higher, and in an i5 generation or higher, somewhere around 3 gigahertz. You can go a little bit less as long as you got the 4 cores and it's an i5 or higher. That'll be more than enough for doing 1080p. Now, keep in mind, I have also been doing this in the background a little bit with an i3 530. It's about 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz, and it was more than enough, and it's only a dual core machine. Now, one of the most important parts for your virtual pinball table is going to be your graphics card. So whatever you get, make sure that it is compatible with your motherboard and your processor. And then beyond that, a bare minimum spec that I would try to look for a video card or better would be a GTX 1050 Ti. Now, I have used a couple of video cards in my research build. I've used a GTX 1050, that worked okay, and then currently I'm using a GTX 770, which is just a touch better than the 1050 Ti. All of those should work for you for our minimum 1080p build. Now, keep in mind, this computer, I don't even think it has a video card. It's using some integrated graphics, which are not going to be good enough, so we'll just have to take a look at that when we get this torn apart. Now, we want this computer to process information lightning quick, so the next important thing is RAM. Now, at a minimum, I would recommend about 8 gigs of RAM, but the more the better. Now, keep in mind, we've got a 10, 15-year-old computer that we're trying to put together, so DDR3 RAM is going to be cheap, if not free, especially if you have a bunch of computers that you are cobbling together to make one. Now, some suggestions for RAM: make sure they are all the same type and the same size so there's no weird compatibility issues. And then the other thing I would recommend is once you have your motherboard and your graphics card all sorted, I would see what is the maximum amount of RAM you can put in each slot and max it right out. So something like 16 or even 32 gigs of RAM would be amazing. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at this free computer that somebody gave me for this build. And because it's a pre-manufactured computer, there literally is a sticker here telling us what's all in here. So let's take a look at it. Taking a look at this computer, this is the model number for this pre-manufactured computer, and you can do a quick Google search, find out all kinds of info, including when this thing was made. So this computer is about a 5 or 6 year old computer, so that's pretty cool. Next thing is that it is a Windows 10 machine. Now, this really doesn't matter as long as it's probably Windows 7 or up. I'm going to show you how you can actually convert it, any of those, Windows 7, 8, or 9 to Windows 10. Okay, next thing up is what is the processor. So this one has an Intel Core i5 and it's the 6th gen. So this is going to have a quad core, which is going to do more than enough that we need. Okay, next one up, this has got some integrated graphics. This is not going to cut it for us, so we're going to have to put a video card in. So put a word out, get some free video cards. Next one is 3 terabyte hard drive. Now, this person who gave me this computer actually told me that they're pretty sure that the hard drive failed on them, wasn't able to boot up, so we're going to look at that in a bit. Not a big deal because this is going to be one of those old school HDD drives, and we're going to upgrade this with a SSD drive, which is way faster and less susceptible to having problems. So that's probably going to be replaced anyway. Next one up is memory. So this one has 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM, and when I looked at the specs on this online, it looks like that is the max for this board, but not a big deal. 16 gigabytes should rock in this machine. Now the chances of an old computer ever being cleaned are pretty minimal. So these things are like vacuums. They're constantly sucking in dust, and the dust sticks electrostatically to all the parts in there, and this happens over 5, 10, 15 years. So usually there's a ton of dust in these things. So before you start, highly recommend you blow it all out. Now if you got a shop, go ahead and use your compressed air, make sure you got your safety glasses, but for those of you guys at home, you're gonna have to go get one of those little spray compressed air bottles from Staples, about 10-15 bucks, and that'll do the trick for you. Right, now that we got this all cleaned up, let's take a look inside. Now I realize there might be a bunch of you out there that are really interested in doing this project, however have never torn apart a computer. So I'm going to do a quick little run view and kind of talk about some safety stuff before we get started when you should be working on computers. Now, one of the very first things is we are dealing with electricity, so you should never have it plugged in and have electricity going to this when you have it open. That's a no-no. Make sure you unplug it, that way you're not going to get electrocuted. Now, the second thing is you have a lot of sensitive electronics equipment in here, and just by touching your finger and having an electrostatic kind of zap across a microchip can instantly fry some stuff on your computer. So a really kind of good tech tip is that before you touch anything in here, any parts, just touch the ground of the case. That way if there is any charge, it just goes to the case and not to the parts. The other kind of suggestion I'd give you is I would not work on a computer over carpet. Just by moving and sitting and walking across the carpet and touching parts, you're going to be building up that electrostatic charge and ready to zap a component on your computer. So work at a table, make sure you got no carpet, always touch the ground before you start working. Okay, let's take a look inside this thing. The first computer part is the case itself. Now, realistically, it's just a sheet metal box. It holds the components in their places so that nothing is touching or loose in here, and that someone can't just reach in and touch something and get electrocuted. Now, you can get low-end cases and high-end cases. Really, all that really matters is the size of it. So sometimes the higher-end cases will be a little bit bigger. Sometimes they've got a clear plexiglass panel so you can see what's going on inside and make use of kind of like LED lights on computer fans and that kind of thing. Now, for our pinball build, we don't even necessarily need a case. We can take all this stuff out and put it inside of our box. That way it's kind of doing the same thing and protected. But for ease of use, really it's up to you. You can leave it in the case as well, as long as it's got enough air circulating across the computer. All right, next part up is our power supply. Now it does exactly what it's called. It supplies power to the individual parts in our computer. Now in order to figure out what size power supply you need, all you do is you look at your spec sheets for all your individual components that you're running, figure out how much power each one uses, so how much watts, add them all up, give yourself a little buffer of 50 to 100 watts, and that is the minimum wattage you're going to need for your power supply. Now, this one is a 300 watts for this pre-manufactured build. I'm going to add about a 75 to 100 watt video card, so I'll have to towel it up and see if I need to get something a little bit more. Not a big deal though. I've got a couple of these kicking around at home. I think one's 450 or 500 watts. So in your computer build, one of the true signs that a power supply is not good in your computer is it won't even turn on. That's a good sign that the power supply has absolutely failed. Now, another thing good to know, depending on how old your power supply is, they tend to supply what they were stated on the label, and then as they get older, they kind of drop down in how much wattage they supply. So a really, really old power supply, don't expect it to be giving the full wattage that it did when it was brand new. All right, next thing up is the motherboard. Now this green printed circuit board on the bottom here, that's your motherboard, and its job is to have pathways and connections so that we can connect with all of the rest of the parts in our computer. So such as having connections for a video card, connections for our memory, our RAM, connections for our data cables from our hard drives so that we can transmit and receive information, batteries for storing memory settings, a spot to put our computer chip or our CPU, connections for power to come in for the board, and all those kind of various things. Now, when you're working on your computer, if you're not sure if your motherboard's good, there's a bunch of stuff you could check for. First thing is there power coming to the board from our power supply? That's a pretty big one. Second one is if this computer can boot up and you can go into your BIOS, you can kind of get all kinds of information, whether things are overheating or settings are not right. Another thing you can look for is all of these little silver circle kind of cylinder shapes on this board. Those are capacitors, and if this thing has ever experienced too much electricity and it's been shocked and fried, sometimes these capacitors can swell or puff out the top. That's a sure sign that that part is no good anymore. Another thing that it could possibly be is that these connections that we're connecting to all these parts, they could be not sitting properly, or the contacts have got a little bit of oxidization and they're not connecting fully. So taking a memory stick out, cleaning all the contacts really well with isopropyl alcohol, and then putting them back in nice and squarely seated, sometimes that can solve your motherboard problem. All right, next up is our CPU, or our central processing unit. Now it lies underneath this fan and underneath that heat sink, and think of it as the brains of the operation. It inputs information, decodes it, thinks about what it wants to do, and executes programs and outputs so things happen. Now, these CPUs are pretty reliable. They actually are usually not the problem. However, if it is the problem, when you go to turn on a computer, you may notice that it doesn't boot up, and instead it makes a bunch of beeps. Those beeps are a diagnostic tool for you to help figure out what's going on. Now, I find when it's an actual CPU problem, what's going on is somebody has maybe upgraded their CPU and put another one in, and the little pins or prongs on the end of the CPU have to fit perfectly into a socket on the motherboard. And so if you get one of those pins bent over and install it, it bends over and damages that CPU, and it's not communicating properly. Another thing that can damage these is heat. So if you don't have a cooling fan that's working and you're running this long time, they can overheat and the chip can get damaged that way. If you are switching out CPUs, I recommend that you wipe out all of the old thermal paste, get yourself a tube of new stuff, and make sure you put a nice even coating over that before you put the heatsink on top and reinstall everything. All right, next up is our RAM, or our random access memory. Now I have 2 sticks of RAM sitting in here in these sockets on my motherboard. Think of RAM as small temporary storage spots for the information that the CPU is using currently or is using repeatedly to run a program or an application. Now, it uses that information from the RAM rather than a hard drive because it is super quick. The transfer speeds are way faster than regular hard drive storage. Now, for our pinball build, we want to have as much RAM as we can because it essentially just makes our computer run super smooth and super quick. Now, if you are working on your computer and you're not sure if you have a RAM issue or not, RAM, when it goes bad, can have all kinds of issues. You can get blue screen of death, you can get random crashes or restarts, crashing during heavy use, so like running Photoshop or running a pinball cabinet on 4K resolution and it can't hack it. You could have distorted graphics, you could have a failure to boot, memory errors that appear on the screen, all kinds of stuff. Now, the good news is there are some ways to diagnose this. First one is really easy if you have multiple sticks of RAM. All you do is you shut it off, open it up, take out 1 stick of RAM, turn it back on and run the computer and see if it does the same crashing or any issues you had. If it doesn't, there's a good chance that the stick you took out is the one that's bad, and then to confirm that, basically shut everything off again, take out the good stick, put in the one you've took out that you suspected is bad, turn the computer back on, and if it does nothing but crash, then you know that that's the problem. Now, besides that, you can also do some software checks, able to do some MAME test and make sure that your memory is okay. Often another problem with RAM is that it is not seated properly. All right, next part up is this hard drive. Now, this is the long-term information storage spot where the computer can retrieve information or store it for the long term. Now, this is an older 3 terabyte HDD or hard disk drive, meaning that this is an electromechanical way of saving that information. So one of the things, if you're not sure if your hard drive is working or not, is listen to the sounds they are making. no sounds at all ever, that's not a good sign. Having spinning sounds that sound a little bit rough, like scraping, grinding, weird clicking noises, that's all telling you that there's signs that there's mechanical issues inside these things. Now, another really easy way is boot your computer on and go into your BIOS settings and see if it even sees or recognizes that you have a removable hard disk drive present. Now, for our pinball build, and really any kind of build nowadays, one of the best things you can do for your computer is replace this with something called an SSD drive, which is a solid state drive. Now, not only are these things 10 to 15 times faster at moving that information, they're a lot less likely to fail on you because there are no moving parts inside them. So, really good upgrade, and this hard drive may have failed, so I think we're going to probably just upgrade our SSD drive automatically and see if that was the fix. All right, next part up for this computer is our GPU, or our graphics processing unit. Now, right here is a PCI Express slot where we would have a video card, but this one does not have one, so it must be using an onboard integrated graphics card instead, which, in my opinion, is only good for web browsing and some basic applications, but not good for what we're doing. So in this case, we need to put in a video card, something like this. So this is a GTX 1050. Now, what these video cards do is they take over any of the picture, video, animation, video game kind of information processing so that the CPU can focus on other stuff. Now, when these tend to fail, if you're trying to troubleshoot your computer, it is generally showing signs graphically that something's wrong. So your video game is slowing down, the frame rates are not very good, you've got weird stuttering, glitches, weird artifacts showing up, that kind of thing. So another thing you can check with these things is, just like a CPU, the GPU does not like heat. So if you have a poor cooling system on here, this cooling fan is not doing its job, then it's going to overheat that chip, and then this video card is going to be garbage. So one of the things that you can do to test that is open up the case and have the power on, so be very careful with electricity. You can very lightly put your finger against that blade, not so you're sticking it right in there, just kind of lightly touching it. And if this fan is doing a good job, you'll feel some resistance, but it will keep spinning as you do that. Now, if you go to lightly touch this and all of a sudden it just stops and you're barely touching it, that's a sign that this cooling fan has not been doing a good job, and most likely your video card is shot. Now, sometimes if you're switching video cards in and out of computers, the other thing it can be is that you don't have the proper drivers installed, so always check that too. You can uninstall the previous drivers, reinstall the current driver for this video card, and see if that helps. So now that you have a little bit of an idea of what's going on inside your computer, let's plug this into a monitor and turn it on, and then we can see what we're dealing with. Alright, it's taking a long time to load up. Okay, here we go, blue screen of death. So you can see that there is power, so our power supply hasn't failed completely. We're just not getting the operating system started and getting into where we need to. So it's already kind of looking like a hard drive failure, and it's suggesting that the device is possibly not connected. So if this is your case, check that you got power and your SATA connection to your hard disk drive. And if not, there's another way we can kind of diagnose whether this is a hard drive issue. If you have a known good hard drive with an operating system ready to go, you could shut this off and plug it in and see if it can boot up from there. But for this build, I actually don't want to use the old HDD. I'm going to put in a nice solid state drive. So really we could start just putting a fresh install on one of those and then see if it boots up. And if it does, then we know it's the hard drive. Now there is another thing that we can try here. When you turn on the computer, there is a key that is said somewhere on the screen. Usually it's delete or F6, and that's for you to get into your BIOS. And you can kind of look in the background to see what kind of the computer sees for removable hard drives. So let's do that now. All right, so it was delete to get into this one. Alright, now this is your BIOS, and it's kind of like the background. It's telling the computer some basic stuff that it needs to know in order to just get started before the operating system takes over. So you can literally scroll through this stuff. It'll give you some information about what your processor is and that kind of stuff. It sometimes can give you temperatures, all kinds of stuff that you want to know. Now what we're looking for is boot options. So right now in our boot priority order means that when you turn this computer on, the first boot device is what it's going to look for to try to turn on the computer and get everything going. Now it says there's a removable device. However, we should be able to see somewhere in here, probably hard disk drive priority or removable device priority, we should be able to see if it actually can show us that hard disk drive. So if we go down to here, press enter, it says there's one drive, Windows Boot Manager. It does not say anything about the hard disk. Let's go back. Let's go to removable device since that's what it's calling it. And there's nothing there. So there's a really good sign that there is nothing seen as of hard drive on here, because I'm not seeing any sizing. Usually it'll say 500 gig or 1000 gig for a terabyte drive. That way you can decide which drive is what you want to boot from. So good signs that this hard disk has failed, and good idea to put in the SSD drive. So let's go ahead and try that. You know, when you're picking up your SSD drive, I would recommend you get something about 500 gigabytes or bigger. Now, keep in mind with memory, it gets cheaper and cheaper every year. However, you get to a certain kind of amount or size of that hard drive, and then the prices just go crazy through the roof. So for me right now, where I'm comfortable paying for before the prices go crazy up, is 500 gigs. Now, I have been playing with this a lot. 500 gig SSD drive is actually going to do really well. You'll get a ton of tables on there and your operating system. That'll be golden. Now, while you're at it, buy one of these, and you're going to get one of these mounting brackets for it as well, just to make your life easier. So let's put this stuff in. Now this is the old hard drive. I'm going to take the SATA and the power and just hook it up onto our new SSD drive, and then we can get going with a fresh Windows 10 install. All right, in order to make a Windows 10 bootable USB, you're going to need some items. First one is you need a USB key. It's got to be 8 gigs or bigger. You're going to need another working computer or laptop that's hooked up to the internet. And then the last thing you need is a Windows 7 or 8 or newer copy of Windows. Now, you don't actually need the disk. All you need is the security key here. So you probably have an old one of these laying around the house. That's fine. It will automatically and free of charge upgrade to Windows 10, so it's kind of a cool trick to know about. And if you don't have one of these can be found cheap, if not free, because a lot of people think they're garbage now. Find them in thrift shops, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, all kinds of things. So get that stuff and let's make a bootable key. All right, in order to make your Windows USB boot key, you're going to put your USB in the computer. Once it pops up, you're going to want to format it. So right click, format it. Doesn't really matter what size it is. You can relabel it. I like labeling it something that you know what it's going to be used for, so like a Windows boot. And make sure quick format's on, and make sure you got 8 gigs so that you have enough for the Windows software. Press start. It gives you a little warning. Make sure you got everything off that you don't want. All right, that's all done. Now the next thing we have to do is type into your search engine Windows boot USB, and then you're going to want to look for create installation media for Windows, and make sure it's from Microsoft.com so you're not kind of accidentally doing something else. Click on that, and then this gives you the instructions and what you need, you know, what size USB and your product key that we talked about already. Now when you're done this, select the one you want. So we want Windows 10. And we want create Windows 10 installation media. So we are going to download the tool now. Okay, and then there are further instructions in here, so basically using this and how to do it. But essentially all you got to do is open this up. So it's an exe file. You can save it to your desktop and open that way, but we really only need to use this for a little bit. All right, all the legal jargon, accept that, otherwise it's not going to let you do it. All right, now you really got to watch what you're clicking here. You know, I don't want to nuke my computer that I'm using this on. So I want to create an installation media for another PC. That's what we want. So we're going to click that, click next. Okay, some stuff to set here. So language, what edition, make sure you're using the right 64-bit. And I don't want to use recommended options for this PC because it's not for this PC, so click that off. Okay, and it needs to be 8 gig USB, so we're going to do that, and then click next. Okay, now it's asking which USB, and it's actually saying that it will delete anything on there as well, so it's kind of pre-doing a format for you, so you could skip that other part. And it's only showing the Windows boot, and because we labeled that USB, we're not having an issue that we accidentally delete something else on this computer. Click next. And then it says feel free to use the PC while it's doing this, so that kind of tells me this is going to be a while. So I'll probably just stop talking and I'll fast forward this or clip it out in the video here. Okay, cool. Be prepared. That took a long time, like almost half an hour. And I don't know if it was because it was downloading 8 gigs and then verifying it to make sure every file is correct for a fresh install. But just keep in mind that takes a long time. All right, this is ready. So finish it and kick it out, and then we can put it into the computer, and I'll show you how to get that set up so we can do the install. Now, if I was going to just turn on my computer, all that would happen is that same error would pop up because it's still trying to load up the operating system off of that failed hard drive. So we do have our new 500 gig SSD drive in there, but there's nothing on it. So now we got to put in our Windows boot USB key before we turn on the computer. And we also have to go into our BIOS settings. So as it's turning on, watch for that screen where it says press delete for BIOS. Just keep tapping delete, and then it'll go into your BIOS settings, and then we can change our boot priority, or basically telling the computer where do we want this thing to start trying to load something. And we're going to tell it it's this USB key, and that's going to engage the whole installation process. So let's start that. Okay, press and delete. There, we're into the BIOS. Now we're going to go over to our boot options, and we should see a new device. So first one is still that hard drive. We have a new boot device, this UEFI General U-Disk. Now I'm surprised it comes up like that, but it wasn't there before. So this is my USB with the Windows boot load on it. So we want to make this new device, the USB key, the first boot in the order there so that it'll skip the other. Now, to change the priority on this, easy. Go up to first boot device, press enter, and then select the one that you actually do want it to be first. So you can see it's just shifted the two over. So now when we save this and exit and restart, it's going to try to boot off the disk, the USB Windows boot USB we just made, and then it's going to initiate the process. So go over to exit, save and exit. All right, here we go. So this is the Windows installation. Now, I don't know how much of this I'm going to show because it's literally just kind of step by step selecting preferences, you know, English and what country you're in and keyboard settings and things like that. So I'll go through some of this. I might trim it down though when we get to the final edit. So language to install: English, time and currency, English, keyboard US. So next, install now. Okay, you're going to have to accept all this stuff, otherwise this won't work. Now, this isn't an upgrade. It's asking us, do we want to keep files? This is a blank setup, so we just want to go Windows only. And now it's asking where we want to put it. Now, keep in mind, we still have that other hard drive that we think has failed inside and connected. No, we didn't. We actually disconnected it. So it's not going to pop up even if it did work. If the hard drive actually did work and you had a separate cable to it, you might see it popped up here. So this would be an option for you to be able to find out whether that hard drive was good or bad. Now, for us, we don't really want that right now, and we can always check into that later once we have a good solid operating system on our SSD drive. So for now, the only one that's plugged in and powered up to the motherboard is the SSD. So it's a 500 gig. There's always a little bit less than what the rated 500 gig is. I don't know what that's about, but that's the one we want. So select that, next. Once again, more settings that you just kind of personalize for where you are. Looks like I actually have some kind of Wi-Fi built into this board. I probably will have to set this up, but for you, just plug your internet into the Ethernet port in the back and then put it to the wall. All right, there we go, internet set up. Like I said, that was through Wi-Fi, but you could just as easy do it just with a hard cord through Ethernet. Alright, this part's going to be all personal stuff for you, so use your Microsoft Windows account stuff. I'm going to use mine, but you go ahead and use yours. Oh, look at that. We've got Windows. Alright, cool, we've got a new fresh Windows 10 install here, but we're not quite done. So when you install your operating system, think of it as it installs just the basic requirements to get this kind of functioning. However, everybody's computer and all the components inside are slightly different. So one of the things we have to do is we have to go and update some of the drivers. Now, think of drivers as specific programs that are working for a specific part in order for them to work properly and function with other ones. So we're going to go look at that and see if we've got any drivers to update, and we still have a video card to put in too. So let's check out this. To take a look if we've got any devices that need driver updates, we're going to go left click on the window pane, left click on the gear looking settings button, going to left click on devices, and we're going to go to device and printers. Now, if you see an exclamation mark on something, that means it needs some work, and if you hover long enough, it'll tell you. This one says there's a driver needed. So we're going to right click on this, and we're going to go to System Properties. Now from here you can go to Device Manager, and then anything with that little exclamation mark tells you that something's up with it. So this stuff here, it's not actually sure what even it is. So what we can do is right click on it, update driver, search automatically for drivers. Okay, Windows was unable to install your base system device. Could not find drivers for the device. Okay, it's given us another option. We could search for updated drivers on a Windows update. So it should have automatically done an update, but let's see if there's a Windows update. Alright, so there is some stuff. I doubt it's going to be what we need, but we can always try it after this. Right, so these are all updated now. Let's do a restart, and once it comes back, we'll see if that worked. If it didn't, we may have to manually update these drivers. So let's restart now. Alright, cool. Let's see if that fixed it. So back to our settings. Yee, it's still there. So let's go back to System Properties, Device Manager, and then what we can do is, notice it says Other Devices. That means the computer was not able to figure out what this is. Now it actually could be something that's not even really used, but it's wanting to do this. So what we can do is we can right click on one of these, and we've already tried the update. Let's go Properties. We're going to go to Details, Hardware ID. If we select this to Hardware ID and we pick the top one here, if I copy that, we can now search for the driver for this. Now you gotta watch what you're clicking on here, because this is kind of a crazy web address here. It's probably not safe, so we're gonna go to somewhere that's more legit. So this isn't a direct fix here, but this one is saying basically the same part. This person can't find the drivers. Let's go to the solution since it's fixed it here, eh? The driver should install for devices, restart the PC. Chipset installation utility. This utility enables the operating system to show the correct name for the Intel hardware. Okay, open it up, accept the terms, next. We can just put that there. Well, we just went from, what, 6, 7 unknown devices and issues down to 1. So we're going to just repeat this for this one here. So that did do the fix for that. So once again, right click. Now we could try doing the update driver. See, this one might do it. Okay, so no, it's not doing it. So we'll do the same thing. So right click, go to Properties, go to Details, change it from what it is, device instant path to hardware ID. It's this right here, so right click, copy, and then we're literally going to go back, take that out, paste our new part in, add driver. Okay, here we have a possible driver here. Okay, this could be it right here, Bluetooth for Windows 10 64-bit. Okay, accept everything. We'll just do typical install. Okay, finish this and let's take a look and see. There it is there. So we have fixed all of our driver issues. Very cool. Now, one of the things we still have to do is set up our video card. There's no external video card, there's just the integrated one into the motherboard. So we're going to shut this all down, take the power off the case and install our video card, and then I'll show you how to update the drivers for that. Now sometimes when you're trying to put in these video cards, you can have issues if you've got kind of like a small form computer case where they've tried to make this case as compact as possible. If you have a case like that and you've got a really big fancy video card, it may not physically fit, so just kind of keep that in mind as you're kind of hunting for computer parts. And also keep in mind that if this is for a pinball build, if it's a matter of the case not being big enough, you can always kind of separately mount this out of a case once it's inside your pinball cabinet. Now for me, there's my PCI Express card slot right there, so it's going to go roughly in like that, and I've got lots of room. This is kind of a smaller factor form. It's only got one fan on it, so it should be good. Now, in order to get this to fit, I got to take a cover off the side, so let's do that. So you got to remember this case was kind of like a pre-manufactured computer that they didn't need to punch out these little holes for a separate video card, yet they don't want to make a completely different case every single time either. So when you take your video card and you put it in there, kind of figure out where this end wants to come out the case. And in this case, it is this slot here. Now, if you just start kind of looking at stuff, sometimes there are little clips and things that have to come off. In this case, this kind of folds out, but that doesn't help us. And there's these 4 slots. Now they're temporary, kind of like, just like almost little tack welds or some kind of like thing made at the factory that you can just kind of basically pop out. You might have to bend it back and forth. So you can take this out and then the connectors can come out. So just bend it back and forth. Watch that you're not breaking anything on the motherboard as you do this. And then this comes off and you can throw that in the garbage. Now it seems like they have some kind of mechanism here to kind of hold down things that you put in here, but there also is threaded holes that you can put a screw in. So I'm going to close this up, which still exposes the hole. And in the case, there's some things that are actually not even mounted, but they still give you the screws. So I'm going to pop one of those in, that way I can make sure that video card is securely mounted and I don't have any issues going forward. Perfect. Now on the inside, when you're putting that in, you got to pull this white tab out of the way. Make sure you line it up properly in the connector, and then when you push down, you're kind of pushing down a little hard, you know, like maybe about 20 pounds of force, and you should feel and hear a click as this kind of clicks back. And just make sure everything is seated. That can be kind of a #1 problem why this doesn't work. Now other things, if there's other little wires and kind of other connectors and things like that around there, just make sure that nothing's been pinched. Nothing's getting in the way of the connector. You know, you could very easily have one of these little wires laying across there and you're trying to jam it all together. All right, perfect. So that's in here. Now let's hook everything back up and then find out if we need the driver for this. Now one thing to keep in mind, this video card, which is a GTX 1050, is still not fancy enough or is powerful enough to require additional power to be supplied to the video card itself. So this one is getting its power from the motherboard, but as you start to get a little bit more fancy, in fact I think you only need to go a couple steps above this card, you will now have to supply voltage to that as well. Now in this system, my power supply may not even have the proper connection to be able to do that, so once again, this might be a possible reason why you'd have to upgrade a power supply, but at least, at a minimum, an additional power wire to your card. But in this case, this one doesn't need it. Now, for your own learning, remember that we suspected that this hard drive had failed, and this is why the computer was basically getting tossed. So now that we have a good working operating system, you could go and put power to the drive and a SATA cable to your motherboard, and then when you turn it back on, you should be able to discover that drive and access information on it. If you can't, then we've basically just troubleshooted that this hard disk drive was the cause for this thing going to the garbage. Remember, when you're putting your HDMI cable, put it in the HDMI slot for your new video card. Don't go back to the standard HDMI slot in your motherboard, or you're not really getting any improvement from doing this. All right, so we got this started up again, and the fact that we can see the display is a good sign that the video card is working because it's only plugged into that. Now, the problem is it might be working off just a generic kind of video card driver, and so it'd probably be a good idea to get one specific for that GTX 1050. So first off, let's go see if there actually needs a driver or not. So, settings, devices and printers. Right click on desktop, and let's take a look at our system properties and our device manager. Oh, weird little glitch there, not sure what that was about. Alright, now I don't see anything unchecked, but if you look under display adapters, oh, there we go. It's that glitch literally might have found this. So it's saying we got an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050. Now we can right click on this, and right there, literally update driver. So now that it knows what it is, let's do a search. And it has already installed it. One of the things I've realized in the last couple of years with working with computers for a while now, they have become so much easier and streamlined to use. A lot of automatic things happen for you, and if you can't get it automatically to happen, there's only a couple little things you need to do to get these things working properly. Now, in my own experience too, using this for Windows to automatically search sometimes isn't exactly the best. So you could go to the NVIDIA website and download kind of like their application kind of program that kind of scan what's in your computer and make recommendations and notify you of automatic updates for drivers and things like that. So if you're having any issues, you go ahead and do that. Now, one thing about your video card that I think is important to mention is that depending on how many monitors or displays you want to have for your virtual pinball cabinet, you have to make sure that you have the same amount of ports coming out of your video card. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get this to work. So I've got 3 here available, so I can run 3 displays. So my playfield, my back glass, and my DMD. Now, for whatever reason, they've kind of alternated what the actual outputs are, so you're also going to have to get some cables to match those different ports. Whoo! There we go. There is our computer ready to go for our virtual pinball cabinet. And you saw what I did there. It was nothing crazy. I wasn't throwing money at the problem, but it did require me to get my hands dirty and learn a bit more about computers. And this is what this video series and channel is completely about, getting you guys excited about learning this stuff and saving money and making some really cool projects while we're at it. So we're looking at not a lot of money here. This monitor that we use just to kind of get this set up here, free from a friend, upgraded to a better monitor for themselves. This computer was going to e-recycling. It was ready to go in the garbage, and it turned out it was a bad hard drive. So for $50, we've got an upgraded 500 gigabyte SSD drive in there, so that's going to make things lightning quick in there for us. And video card, another friend upgraded their video card, and this was literally just sitting in their house collecting dust, and it's going to do a great job giving us our 1080p resolution. And if it doesn't work out, we can always upgrade it later to a better video card, because this one was free. We spent no money on it. So pretty neat. Now, the computer that you get for free or cheap is probably going to have something else wrong with it, and I can't cover absolutely everything that it could be. It'd be pretty hard to do in a very short video. But one thing I would say to that is there is usually not absolutely everything wrong with these computers. The most common thing is that somebody has a computer for about 4 or 5 years, it starts to slow down, and then something kind of doesn't work very good anymore to the point where they want to upgrade. They go buy a brand new computer, brand new laptop, and this thing sits and collects dust for usually a whole bunch more years before they finally just want to get rid of it, and it's sitting in their house. So when you figure out this computer's one problem, could be a hard drive, could be memory, could be just a failed video card, that's usually the kind of things that it is. And so it's not far from what I showed you. You just got to figure out for your individual needs. Now, another example that I can give you from a recent computer that I refurbished was that this was a 16-year-old gaming computer, and it was still working, but it was not working very good. In fact, when you played a very easy to emulate video game, it almost seemed like it was in slow-mo. Think of like Super Mario jumping and taking twice as long to come back to the ground. And so when we looked at the frames per second, it was really quite low, and so that's kind of screaming video card. So when we opened it up, we took a look at the video card, and I'm going to try to zoom in here as much as possible so I can show you this. Now, on close inspection of this video card, and it's a little hard to see on camera, so I'm going to have to explain it more than anything. What you're looking for is looking for damage to parts. So these capacitors often blow when these graphic cards are done. So these two capacitors in particular, the top sheet metal is kind of bulged a little bit, and you can even see some kind of like brown burnt residue that's kind of leaking and coming out of these capacitors. This is a sure sign that this board is done. Now, if you were really crazy cheap, you could even desolder this and put in the exact capacitors back in there, make sure you put them the right way, and you might get this video card back working. However, keep in mind, I just said this is a 16-year-old video card, so realistically, you can get a better video card for free already, so why would you bother doing that? But this is a good way to diagnose whether you've got a video card issue. All right, so this is the 16-year-old gaming PC I was talking about. The video card I just showed you came out of here, and I put in a GTX 770, a little bit more powerful. I had to supply my own power with it, hence the upgrade in the power supply. And the only other thing I had to do to this build was it came with 2 sticks of 2 gig, and each of these slots could have 4. So what I did is I hunted for free cheap RAM, and I got given free 2 sticks of 4 gig DDR3 RAM, and then I hunted online for a matching set, so same name, same frequency, so now I have 16 gigs of RAM in there. Now this is all put to a dual core i3 530, I believe, so running around 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz, and this thing has been running a virtual pinball cabinet totally fine. So you don't need to spend a ton of money on these builds, and this is just yet another example. Oh, scratch that. One other thing, I did the same thing I did on this video. I put in another 500 gig SSD drive, not because it was bad, but just because I wanted that increase to speed. The next video up in this series is probably going to be how to install and configure some of the software needed to run a virtual pinball cabinet now that we have a refurbished computer here. So look forward to that, and I will probably have to figure out some monitors pretty quick too, so I may make a separate video. I got to get a big one for the playfield, a smaller slightly one for a back glass, and another even smaller for our DMD/topper. So look forward to those videos in the near future. If you liked the video, got something out of this, I would really appreciate a like and a subscribe and a comment. Let me know what you liked about the video. If you have any questions or concerns about what's going on in this video, just comment down below and I'll try to help you as much as possible. Keep in mind, diagnosing your individual computer problems can be a little tricky through a comment, so I'll try my best, but no promises there. If you haven't followed us already on Instagram, take a look for us, Way of the Wrench, and until next time, take it easy.